Okay, the big theme, two parents are better than one. Why?
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, I come at this as an economist. And so it's a pretty simple answer, which really is that two people tend to have more resources combined than one person alone. And so that's the case I'm making in the book. All of my explanations for the differences in outcomes between kids growing up in one and two parent homes really rests on this idea that shouldn't be controversial. It's not a moral or value laden proposition. It's just that two parents have more combined money, they have more combined time, they have more emotional bandwidth. All of that allows them to create more resource-rich environments for their kids, and we see that that happens in ways that really benefit kids' outcomes.
What outcomes are you looking at in particular?
So we know from mounds of data that kids who grow up in two-parent homes as compared to kids from one-parent homes are they're less likely to have behavioral struggles, they're less likely to get in trouble in school, they're more likely to graduate high school, they're less likely to become young unmarried parents, they're less likely to get involved with the criminal justice system, they're more likely to graduate college, they're more likely to have higher earnings in adulthood. All these kinds of sort of typical success markers that we can see in our sort of observational data sets.
Now, one of the things you're very aware of as a data analyst is the difference between correlation and causation. And I know a lot of economics is really focused on trying to sort that out in a lot of applied microeconomic work. So let's spend a minute on that. First, can you explain before you talk about how you solve that problem? Can you just explain for the audience why correlation and causation not being the same thing is an important
Yeah.
issue?
So when I say things like single parent households are 5 times more likely to be poor than married parent households, immediate economist reaction is, well, poor women are much more likely to be single parents. And so you're picking up a correlation or you're confusing cause and effect. And so what we have to do is try and figure out, is there really something about two-parent households versus one-parent households that's leading to these differences, as opposed to differences across the type of people who are married or raising their kids in one or two-parent households. Now, the complicating factor here in this scenario is we could never run a social experiment or a randomized control trial where we randomly assign kids to grow up with married parents or single parents and break all of that selection and say, see, I've nailed the single variable that matters. Having said that, the evidence is really overwhelming here. There are hundreds of studies that work to compare outcomes for kids from two-parent or married parent households as compared to kids from one-parent household, controlling for all of the things we can observe about the mom. So what I can tell you with, confidence is that even looking at the outcomes of children whose moms are the same age when they initiate childbearing, or they have the same level of education, they live in the same state, they're from the same race or ethnic group, their kids on average do better if they're growing up in a married or two-parent home as compared to one. And so that is really irrefutable. There are just hundreds of studies showing that. Some studies will also look at kids over time. So you have the same parents, the same kids. What happens when there's a transition in their family, when the parents get divorced? And so you see an immediate reduction in income, you see an increased likelihood the child moves, you see an onset of, sort of worsening education outcomes. So it's pretty clear, I think, across the studies that family structure matters for kids' outcomes. I think the more interesting question then becomes, what is it about family structure that matters? And here, again, sort of what we see in the data supports the logic and the idea that it's really a resource difference. Heuristically, we can see that differences in income, because two-parent households tend to have, like, on average, they have about twice as much income coming in. Again, not surprising because most moms work. So you have two earners in the household or two potential earners, twice as high income. Income differences seem to be, it depends on, the time period, the outcome, but let's just say about half. Half of the difference in two-parent households just comes from the fact that two-parent households have more income. But then the other things we see are engagement with parents matter. Lots of, their parenting approaches, which is reflective of the level of stress, that kind of matters. So I think thinking about what it is about family structure is really more illuminating at this point than whether it's really about family structure. That part seems pretty clear.
I mean, when I think about the causation issue, I was thinking that there might be some natural experiments we could leverage. I mean, divorce is a choice between, but there's certain sort of things in life that aren't choices. Like, somebody gets hit, dies in a one
Yeah.
spouse dies in a car accident. Say that's kind of a random event. Is any of this work just distinguish between, say, people who are single parents because of divorce or versus single parents because of death versus single parents for just maybe you had never had a father in the person's life?
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of different ways people wind up parenting alone or kids wind up in single parent households. The short answer to your question is yes, people have looked at it and the pathways matter. But before I sort of expand on that, let me be clear. The rise in single parent households over the past 40 years that I focus on in my book is driven by an increase in never marriage among parents. This is why marriage features so prominently in the story I'm telling in the book. 52% of unpartnered mothers now, moms who are raising their kids without a partner in the home, 52% of them were never married. That's a really big difference from 1980 when it was 22%. Divorce is actually down in this country. It's just that fewer people are getting married, including those who have a kid together. So that's really important because it turns out that kids whose parents have never been married, in some sense, are at the largest resource deficit. They're much less likely to be getting income support from the second parent than if the parents were married at some point and were divorced. Kids whose parents were divorced had the benefit of two parents in their house for some of their childhood, and actually work on divorce shows that the longer kids have the benefit of two parents in their household, the smaller are their gaps in outcomes with kids who stay in, who are in stably married homes. So kids whose parents have never been married, they're also less likely to have meaningful engagement or interaction with the second parent. Again, just thinking about this from a resource perspective, that means the largest deficit in resources. And unsurprisingly, that's where we see sort of the worst outcomes for kids.